Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody who constantly interrupts you? Maybe they ask you a question and it's clear that, sure, they're trying to listen to your response, but everything in their body language, maybe even in their tone of voice, communicates that they just can't wait to tell you what it is that they think, what their answer is to the question that they've asked you. Here's another scenario that's actually similar, but in a more subtle way. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and you are listening to what they're saying, but really what you're paying attention to is what you are going to say in response to what they're saying? So you're having a conversation with somebody and you're nodding, you're listening, but you're just thinking, okay, what am I going to say next? What is my response? What kind of question should I ask next? So that means quite a lot of your mental awareness and attention is actually placed on yourself and your inner thought patterns, as opposed to really truly listening to the person who is speaking to you. Now, this is, of course, not the same as interrupting, but the result of both scenarios is actually one or more of the parties involved in that conversation feeling like something was missing. It wouldn't necessarily be a conversation that they will hold close to them and think, wow, that was really inspiring, that was really expansive. So what's the solution? The solution is to practice the art of listening. And in this episode, we're going to talk about that a little bit, and specifically in the context of learning to be a better communicator, learning to express yourself better, whether that is through speaking or singing or presenting. And I'm also going to share some strategies that you can start implementing to practice becoming a better listener. Our ability to influence others is directly impacted by the way we use our voices. After over 16 years coaching some of the world's biggest voices in business, music, TV, and film, I can say with certainty that if you have a voice, then you can learn to use it with confidence and skill. My name is Crystal Diaz. Welcome to the Vocal Branding Podcast. Whenever I work with a new student or a new client for the first time, the first part of the journey of really helping them to find their voice involves a lot of exploration, involves releasing their voice, helping them to understand the mechanics of vocalizing, and also reflecting back what it is that I'm hearing. And really, that involves me demonstrating a lot. So I'll often say, here's what I'm hearing, and then I'll demonstrate. And then I'll say, here's what I'm looking for. And this is really the bulk of learning to master your voice. And this is the art of listening. And I don't mean that in terms of pitch recognition. So if somebody's working with me specifically on singing, and I say that, sometimes that can be interpreted as, well, does that mean I have to be perfect pitch or have to be able to identify a C sharp just by listening to it? And of course, that's not what I mean at all. Improving your listening skills involves paying attention to the way the voice sounds. And that really is activating a very specific part of the brain. It's the auditory cortex. The auditory cortex is the part of the brain that processes the sounds that we hear, specifically vocal tones and rhythms of speech. We use it to understand and give meaning to the emotions behind the words that people use and the way in which they say those words, the way in which they express them. In the process of becoming a better listener, what we're really doing is actually training this auditory cortex to be more sensitive to the way the voice sounds. And this is so important, because when it comes to communication, both in terms of speaking and singing, we need to listen as much as we are communicating and expressing ourselves. This auditory cortex is so important in communication because without learning to listen to ourselves, how do we know how we come across, if that makes sense? If I'm speaking in a certain way and I'm not aware of how my voice is coming across because I'm just not paying attention to it, or I don't know how to pay attention to the way my voice sounds or the inflections or the nuances that I'm using subconsciously to speak, then it could very easily be misconstrued simply because I'm not intentional or I'm not aware of how I come across. For example, I have one client who has a tendency to speak in very short, clipped sounds. She is not aware that she does this. In fact, it wasn't until we started working together and she reviewed videos of her speaking when she realized that every sentence clips at the end like this, and it's very, very precise. And of course, that is happening on a very subconscious level. So if you can imagine having a conversation with somebody who's constantly speaking in this way all the time, ooh, that's quite exhausting actually to speak that way, but it's also very exhausting to listen to. On top of that, what kind of impression do you feel you might have of a person who's constantly speaking in this way without much variance in the way that they are speaking when they are in a dialogue with you? So when you think of that person and then you remember the way that they were communicating or the way that they were expressing themselves, then you have an association of that person, and that becomes locked into your impression of them. And the person who's speaking that way, just like my client, has no idea that that's how they were coming across, simply because speech patterns become ingrained in us as a habit. And if we don't practice active listening, it's so easy for those habits to just be seen as the norm, right? We just accept that as the way in which we are. But actually, we can change the patterns of our speech. We can change the way in which we express ourselves and use our voices. But the first step, again, is to become aware of those habits. And the only way that you can become aware of those habits is to listen to yourself, is to practice deep listening, active listening to your own voice. Now, the art of communication is not just about learning to listen to ourselves better, but it's actually learning to hear other voices, other people's speech patterns and inflections, tuning our awareness to listen to other people on a deeper level. And in my program, one of the things that I have my clients, my students do is actually listen to voice coaching sessions that I have. So they will actually observe me coaching another client on their vocal technique. Your listening skills are going to be so much more enhanced if you are practicing actively listening to different types of voices, different types of inflections, listening to different people going through the process of vocal exercises and really paying attention to the way the voice moves, the way the voice can be manipulated. The analogy I like to use here is of a painter learning to paint by understanding how to manipulate the brushes, how to mix color, how to use their tools, while at the same time recognizing the importance of appreciating other people's artwork, right? Seeing how other people are manipulating color, seeing how other people are creating these pictures from their own self-expression. So in the same way that a painter needs to evolve and train their visual skills, a speaker or a singer needs to evolve and train their listening skills, not just by listening to their own voices or their coaches' voices, but also listening to fellow students' voices, to other speakers, other singers, but listening to their voices in a very particular way, not just hearing what they're saying, but really actively listening. So we've spoken so far about the importance of listening when it comes to mastering your voice, whether you want to speak, sing, communicate better, become a better presenter, or all of the above. 80% of that work really does involve learning to pay a better attention to the way the voice sounds, really developing that auditory cortex, which again is the part of the brain that processes the sounds that we hear. We can spend hours and hours or years learning the strategies and the techniques for how to have a good sounding voice, but if we are not also training our ear to really hear ourselves and hear other people, then we're not really going to pick up on those subtle inflections, those subtle nuances, and those subtleties of the voice is really what makes the instrument so expressive and so incredibly powerful. So how do we do that? How do we actually start practicing becoming a better listener? So here are 3 things you can do. Number 1, learn to sing. That is by far the best way to become a better listener. But there is a very specific way that we teach people to learn how to sing. We teach them not just to hit notes and, sing on time and on beat and on pitch and all of those things. Of course, that's important. But again, that listening component is so crucial in this process of learning how to sing, because I could give you all of the exercises, that we use to teach our students. But if you don't know what it is that you're listening for, you could do them over and over and over again, and you will not hear an improvement. You won't, because you can't hear yourself. It's kind of like learning to paint blindfolded, right? You could paint and paint and paint, but if you never learn to look at what it is that you've created and really analyze it or review what it is that you've created, you're not really going to see that improvement, because you're not going to be able to know what it is to improve. So yes, learning to sing is going to be hugely valuable for you, but make sure you're doing it in a structured way and that you have some kind of feedback component, somebody there to guide you to know how to pay attention to your voice in a very strategic and a very nuanced way. The next thing you can do is to get into the habit of recording yourself and reviewing your videos. If you are somebody who wants to master your voice for singing, then definitely you want to be singing and recording that and reviewing your singing practices, and ideally sending that practice to a professional or somebody who can guide you, who can actually reflect back what it is that they're hearing, because oftentimes when you hear yourself, you might not actually be really hearing yourself. You could be listening to yourself through the lens of self-criticism. That's not always very helpful in that lens. So it is valuable to have somebody to give you that feedback, but make sure it's somebody that you trust and who has experience in vocal technique, of course. And if you are somebody who wants to master your voice for speaking, then record your meetings, record yourself in a session, or even if it's audio recording. It's so valuable, because when we are using our voices in context, we're not going to be paying attention to the way that we sound unless we're trained to do that, unless we're training ourselves to do that. But most of the time, we're going to be focusing on the content and delivering whatever presentation or speech that we need to execute. We're going to be paying attention to our context, the way that we are, the room, the aircon, all kinds of factors. So we're not really going to be able to practice deep listening when we are actually speaking. So the only way to do that is by recording ourselves and listening back. Ideally, you are recording yourself on video. So whenever I work with clients, I do work with them online on Zoom. And so that's very valuable, because then the student or the client can actually go back and review the video and notice things about their voice, or notice their speech patterns that they would have never seen or noticed before. This is hugely valuable. One video can already tune your awareness to speech patterns that you never realized you had. So just start. Record your Zoom meetings. You can always delete them afterwards, but review them with the lens or the intention of listening to the way your voice sounds. Okay, so don't review it in terms of the content. Don't review it in terms of the structure of your presentation. Review it simply through the lens of, I'm listening to the way my voice sounds, and I'm also listening to how I'm communicating what it is that I'm communicating, how that could be coming across. Do I notice any speech patterns that seem to come up, any particular kinds of inflections? For example, are my words skipping up at the tail ends? That's called upspeak. That's a very common speech habit that happens very subconsciously. Or maybe you tend to speak to very low, and so the tonal quality can come across as very dark and somber. Or maybe suddenly you realize that you're speaking up here all the time, and when you're speaking up here in this manner, it can come across as ungrounded, as nervous energy, and you might not realize that until you actually record and review back. So get into the habit of it. It's going to be awkward at first, of course. Nobody likes to watch themselves speak on video or on camera, but do it. When you do it often enough, it will feel less awkward, and the more you practice this, the more you're going to be able to listen to yourself as objectively as possible. The third thing you can do to improve your listening skills is to practice whole body listening. Now, this is a phrase that I learned from my kids, who were taught whole body listening. And so sometimes they'll say, Mommy, you're not listening with your whole body. And then usually it's because I'm holding my phone, I'll put it down and face them, eye contact. Whole body listening is really twofold. One part of it is to do with you as a listener, giving the gift really of your full attention to whoever it is that's speaking. And that involves eye contact, your body language, turning to face them, no distractions, right? No touching of phones, no looking at the watch, looking at the time, or trying to call the waiter if you're at a restaurant. Really giving the gift of your full attention to somebody. That alone is incredibly powerful. That can already change the tone of a conversation. Can you imagine having a conversation with somebody who gives you their full attention and doesn't try to interrupt you, doesn't try to insert themselves in the conversation, is just fully listening? That is probably one of the best gifts you can give anybody, your full attention. That's whole body listening. What you're signaling to that person is, you're important, the words you're saying are important to me, I'm going to give you my full attention. And that is something that will always be received positively. Now, the other part of whole body listening involves you as an observer. So yes, your body is listening, your whole body is listening, but you are also listening or observing the whole body of the speaker. So you're not just hearing the words that they're using, but you're listening to the inflections, you're listening to pauses, you're listening to the speed at which they're speaking, you're listening to breathing patterns, you're observing their body language, if they're fiddling with something, if they cross their legs at certain points or cross their arms at certain points in the conversation. Just take all of this in. When you're listening and observing the person fully, you will actually get into the habit of becoming more empathetic. You're going to become somebody who can pick up on the energy that the person is giving you. So it's not just what they're saying, it's how they're saying it, the way that they're saying it, the way they carry themselves, the way that they're breathing as they are speaking to you. If you can train yourself to get into the habit of noticing this about people, this is a skill that will serve you for the rest of your life, all relationships and all areas of your communication. It really truly is a superpower. And this itself is one of the reasons why I believe I've been able to build such a successful, thriving business coaching voices, is because I've learned to really give my students and my clients my full attention. Earlier on in my career, I knew the importance of this to pick out the right exercises to help them for their songs. But then I learned that this skill set can be transferred to speaking as well. And that has actually helped me to establish very important and very valuable and authentic relationships with people in my business and also personally as well. If I have to credit one thing that has really helped me build the business and the reputation and the authentic relationships that I have, it is becoming a better listener. And this is a skill that you can learn forever. You can always become a better listener. I'm still learning to hear nuances in the voice and to observe people on a deeper level all the time. And the deeper I go in terms of my understanding, the more enriching the relationships that I have become. I hope this episode has been valuable for you. And of course, if you are ready to take that next step and you want to work with me to find your voice and master your voice, whether that is for singing, speaking, presenting, communicating, or all of the above, then consider joining one of my programs. I have a singing membership that you can join very affordably and very conveniently. Or if you want to up level, you're ready to work one-on-one with me, then I have a coaching program. We only have a certain number of spots available for that coaching program every year. So you can just send us an inquiry and we'll let you know if there are any spots available. The links to learn about my various programs and masterclasses are in the description box where you are watching this video, or in the show notes if you are listening to this as a podcast, or you can visit my website, crystaldiaz.com. That's Crystal with a K. All right, until next time.